Hey, Yiska,
Hey,
why are so many players retiring from Overwatch?
well, it's a multitude of different factors. I would say it's about five distinct different ones, but yeah, it has been pretty hard. I honestly like folks that have followed my career will know that profit stung specifically
Yeah,
because I feel like very early on I was among the first advocates for that guy, and really in Overwatch he like has accompanied my career in that sense, right? And yeah, I don't know. I found like tweets from way back 2017, 2016 about the guy, right? It's um it's sad that this has come to this moment, specifically because it felt like in his messaging that it wasn't necessarily his choice, that he's still very much interested in the game, but that for several reasons that he didn't go into detail, but that might contain some of those that we're about to mention. Um, it's sad that arguably for many he's the goat of Overwatch esports overall.
for sure.
Um, I think there are others, of course, to be mentioned. But there's also other retirements that really sting, and I could see also other folks feeling similarly about people like Twilight, people like Fearless, and yeah, it's a sad moment, but as always, like all you can hope for is that this leaves room for new people to pour in, and so the cycle is renewed.
For sure. For sure. So, yeah, like you say, so there have been some big player retirements over the last kind of few weeks or months. Profit being probably the biggest one as the greatest of all time. We talked about that a bit, but we'll go over the kind of reasons why we think that's kind of happened in this episode. So, what I kind of wanted to ask was, do you think this was kind of inevitable given the collapse of the Overwatch League and salaries were never likely to get as high as they were in that competition? The economics of being an Overwatch pro have changed drastically over the last couple of months. Do you think that's one of the biggest factors?
Yes, I think the economic impact is arguably the largest factor in how this is going down. Salaries have dropped across the board. I think the top earning teams in Overwatch League are many times over the top teams that are currently being paid. There are some good offers still. I think Toronto is one of them, specifically because they do get salaried. I'm not privy to how high that is and how livable that is. But the
Sure.
fact that they still have a team house and are housed in Toronto, of all places, is a pretty significant investment. And that is probably one of the sweetest deals that you can have in Overwatch esports.
For sure.
There have been rumors on the Falcons' salaries. I heard very different like ranges. Some say like it's absurdly high in comparison, never as big as like even I would say like a top third Overwatch League team the last seasons. Um, and some say like even those guys need to figure something out about having a second job or a second level of income or live off their many savings that some of those guys have made due to being excellent at this game for a long time, right? Um, I don't want to for this to come off as like these people rinsed the Overwatch League in some way. I think the Overwatch League was probably one of the more responsible ones in how player salary was handled. Um, I don't think we got ever really close to these outrageous salaries that these some of these competitors have in other esports titles. Even when Overwatch League still had comparable viewership and comparable buzz and comparable hype around it. Some of that was, of course, due to shenanigans with a soft salary cap that was legally looked into. But generally speaking, it was relatively fine, I would say. I'm not sure if it was ever responsible in a sustainable way. I think in hindsight, you would have to say that certain companies like, I would say, the Boston Uprising were much more reasonable in what their business was able to accrue and pay out in that regard. Um, but yeah, it is certainly the case that there are less offers. There's less teams now, I would say, that are offering a livable salary, and even there are edge cases where you could argue, like, maybe in some parts of the world this is livable. Depends on where these people live, cost of living and everything.
Yeah.
I think for most, and I think you all also see this to a degree, they need to have some supplementary income, and some of them fire up their streams. Some have taken to, content creation, some other regards. Some others have taken onto coaching. And I think this is not just a player issue. It is also a thing that's done industry-wide right now, right? So the economic factor, for sure, is probably the largest part. I will say it still surprises me how many people have stuck around given the decline, which also shows the dedication. And arguably, and not many will love this statement, but shows that there was an overpaying if the employee is fine with taking vastly less. Now, of course, in comparison to the actual economics of the league and the VC injected, I think it's very fair, especially for those with agents, to negotiate salaries that are reasonable for the amount of money that's being thrown around. If you have 25 million buy-in fee, that means you can't pay scraps to your players because there's a priority. Esports is about players; it's not about teams, right? So once again, this is a course correction, and I think also another factor to consider here is that many teams with endemic esports organizations have not announced yet. But I'm not sure how many there will be in the end. But the general idea is that nobody's getting rich of these salaries at this point.
For sure. I was gonna sort of leading off from that. I was gonna say, do you think it's because obviously players retire, players will come in. There'll always be a kind of a talent feed, if you like, from younger players or players who are just kind of coming up. Do you think that it's still a sustainable kind of career path for younger players coming through? Do you think that seeing some of these bigger players retire, it might have a look of a sinking ship, even though there's not so many of them, as you say, you've been surprised by the amount that are sticking around? Or is it a good thing for them and there's kind of less competition for places? And even from an economic standpoint, if they don't have those Overwatch League salaries as a point of comparison, does that ease that pathway a bit?
I mean, almost certainly would have to be, because if you're an esports player, your career is time gated. It's even more true in Overwatch, right? Like the vast majority of the players will wash by 25, if I'm being honest, right? And the consideration is that you have to make more than others in that respective age bracket would, given their entry jobs after a university degree. These guys don't have that. They need that type of funding to hold themselves over in order to bridge and go into the next part of their life and finance themselves in their education in some way, right? It's like, it's not a given that specifically because of the state of the industry, they will find new jobs anywhere remotely in the region, even though many are trying, right? And therefore, like the deal is much less sweet. It's also a negotiation that you have to make with your future self, right? Some of the deals that these younger guys specifically are taking are doing for the love of the game. They're not getting ahead financially. They're not going to finance their education based on that, right? They, in some aspects, are delaying life for that experience that will hopefully guide them and help them. And there are some transitory skills, but it's limited, right? If we're being honest.
For sure. Let's get off the economics a bit, and like you mentioned the game, let's talk about the game, because one example in particular, you think of Nero. He had a long 6-year long career across the Overwatch League, and he cited problems with the game as one of the main reasons that he had for retiring, the switch to 5v5 and all the kind of problems that have come with that. How much do you think the state of the game has a role to play in people who've retired, and especially among the older guard who've been around and were around for 6v6 for most of their careers? Do you think that was a big factor, or is that a limited case?
I think many that started in Overwatch 1, especially deep in Overwatch 1, Season 1, Season 2, maybe even Season 3, those guys saw the changes, didn't really like the change, but they also didn't have an opportunity really to jump off, because if you're in a contract or if you're still making good money, you enjoy the environment, not necessarily the game that you're playing, I think there's much more incentive to stick around, even though you don't like the game as much anymore. Now, as those factors lessen or fall away, that then comes into the forefront. Can you really, for the love of the game that you don't love, and for basically something that cannot sustain you, can you really invest time into it, right? And that's an increasingly hard decision to make. And I think this is an issue that does bubble up in some of those pro player cases. I'm not sure how big the effect of it is. I think I'm not sure if there would be an equal amount of pro players that like the changes, but it's not outrageous, right? It's like it's not like a super majority of players in the Overwatch League didn't like the move to 5v5. I think in terms of general game balance, changes come and go, right? I think most of them had careers where the meta changed so drastically in this game that they kind of catch the drift that things will eventually change. It could be that, okay, do you know the New Year's effect?
The New Year's effect.
Right. So the New Year's effect is basically you could totally like go to the gym every day, every other 365 days of the year, right? It would totally be possible. It would actually probably be much more rational to do that.
You don't have to call me out like this, Yuska. Like
you know how filled gyms are in January? It's the worst part of like being a gym bro is like having to be there for January and like having that thing filled up to the brim. Basically the effect of we love a good occasion for things. We love a good occasion to drink. We love a good occasion to start weight loss. Love a good occasion to just change things about life that are pretty considerable. Now, the demise of the Overwatch League is a pretty big event, right? That in itself might give one pause and allow one to think about where one wants to go in life. I think the vast majority of us realized that this effect exists also during the pandemic, where a lot of people got to level up their introspection skills and look at themselves, look at where life goes, and therefore, I mean, people decided to have children, people decided to have different jobs and whatnot, right? Like to switch careers. So all of this, like an occasion is a big one, right? Now, if you didn't take the occasion that the Overwatch League died, then this patch might do it as well. Like you might have been tumbling after the death of the Overwatch League. You might be one of the best players in the world, and you might even have offers. But if you look at that patch, that changes the equation a little bit because this patch, I mean, the changes in that regard need to be tested and tried, and feasibly, most of this season will be held under whatever the gross or like the general direction of high HP pools, bigger hitboxes and whatnot. This will probably stick for a while. You have to consider that, right? So maybe some of them have been toppled over. I'm not sure it's remotely as big as the demise of the Overwatch League was, right?
Yeah.
And then also the occasion of not getting the kind of offers, once again, the economic impact, right? So I think the game has a pretty big impact, especially on the hardcore player that really does it for the love of the game and only so happened to make a good living of it. But I think the vast majority of cases still can make it.
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about the game. We talked about economic factors. We've talked about the potential of the New Year effect. Any other kind of big reasons or kind of justifications you think for the retirements? Any kind of, I don't know, cultural aspects or anything like that?
Yes, I think cultural aspects are pretty large, right? Like one, your parents start nagging. Especially if your paychecks keep declining, right? And also the mounting pressure of having to find a spouse, or not having to, but most of them want to build families and whatnot. Based on that, sounding pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
But another big one, the Overwatch League specifically, because we had 60% South Korean players, is that military service for the vast majority of guys is knocking on the door. I'm
Yeah.
not even sure there were many players that did military service already and then came back. I don't remember even one of them, right?
Yeah.
Because it's an 18-month mandatory military service. It depends a little bit on what type of, which branch of the military you are in. But generally, you're out for 1.5 years, and that switches perspective and whatnot. So coming back is hard, but even like going in, it is mandatory. There are very few edge cases where esports players were made it exempt for their performance. I think the one that I can remember is the recent Asia Games that the South Korean team won.
Yeah.
The other one is if you hadn't finished. And of course, Overwatch is not privy to these exemptions. Then the other one would be if you haven't finished high school. This is famously the case for Faker in League of Legends. I'm not sure if it's the case for. I mean, that might be more, but I'm not aware of any.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, you're getting the letter from the military with good cause. You delay it, but there's only so much you can keep shoving it back, right?
Yeah.
Once again, even if you could shove it back until your 28th birthday, then you go 1.5 years. Now you're starting your career at 30.
Yeah.
This is a tough one, right? Especially if you have nothing lined up in esports afterwards. So keep in mind also how academically driven that culture generally is. I think that has to have an impact on the Koreans specifically. In North America, I think that folks can sustain their career more responsibly, mainly through collegiate and scholarships there. And I think there's a siphoning effect. Now, whether or not those guys will participate in Overwatch Championship Series, I think a lot of teams will try. I haven't looked at the signups yet, but that's a much more responsible way. And they do have the benefit of not having anything, any civil duties in the near future. But keep in mind, and let's not mince words here, delaying your education does impact your life pretty heavily.
For sure.
Right. It's not only does it get harder to learn, to socially integrate into the social groups at university that might be 7-8 years younger than you are. They might not have your temperament, which is inherently competitive, and like I mean, there's some overlap of people just working hard towards any endeavor. Even though I will say we got a bunch of video game addicts. Let's not in sports here. So all of this combined makes it a very tough choice, and I think a lot of folks honestly felt pod committed a little too long. In general, right? It's at the like if you weren't making like 80, 100K, especially in North America, you're probably not going to come out ahead based on you being able to finance your own, what's it called? Your own studies, right? For your university degree, right?
Yeah.
Like you're behind. You're probably learning less quickly, and it probably has some impact on your ability to gain jobs after, and even your ability to do your job after. So these factors are certainly also to be considered.
Yeah, 100%. I was gonna say, and I think I probably know your opinion after that last answer, but do you think we will see pros who kind of retired prior to the Overwatch Championship Series being announced and kind of cited the uncertainty around the esports scene as one of the reasons for why they kind of retired, might be tempted back? Or is that poll big enough, do you think?
Right. So like the future predictions are hard. So one is it probably won't be based on the information that we got during this year. The only thing that could realistically do this is the prize pool announcement of the Esports World Cup.
Yes.
Being honest, right? Now, if you quit and you haven't played, you're very unlikely to keep up at that level, and you're unlikely to be picked, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's questionable if we will in the future see people return after this year, depending on how this season goes, depending on how viewership is, depending on what kind of teams come in, and what other incentives are created, how well the skin packs do, for instance, like the revenue share, and what the organizations there then think about Overwatch as an esport. So coming back, specifically in the Korean scene will be hard. I could see it maybe happening more in Europe, where like long lost brothers of the European contender scene will see that there's finally something at tier 1 to compete at, on the continent, and therefore return to the game. I think there could be some effect. It would have to go very well, right?
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, if you're already divorced from, you either love the game, and that changed recently, or you do not like any of the other competing games. Like it's not just that you're competing or figuring out against the rest of real life. You could also say, "Why not play Valorant?" For instance.
Well, Carpe was one of the guys who kind of came up when I was kind of researching these questions, kind of ask you, like, he got pulled in by Valorant. Is the pull of OWCS enough to kind of suggest to them maybe they want another crack at it? But like you say, players are washed at 25 in Overwatch, so maybe not.
I mean, who knows how the scene changes, right? I would actually say, in order to this would be my fifth factor after game, cultural impact, economic impact, and the New Year's effect, is the performance impact, or rather the impact of the changing system.
Right.
Okay. So there are some historical precedents in esports history that really illustrate this point, that as a game goes through a fundamental switch in scene structure, mainly between open and closed system, and league and tournament play, that the type of players you see are very different. So the first one is the perennial brought up is Moscow 5. That was a Russian League of Legends team, I think almost 10 years ago, maybe even longer, actually. And those guys were among the best in the world. And then when the international leagues were formed, and they had to go for regular league play, and they didn't have the preparation for just like bigger events, that's when their performance dropped so significantly. Another more Overwatch example is Envy. Envy wins Apex Season 1, dominates for a long time in the North American region. Even I would think, like, yes, they weren't the best team in the world when the Overwatch League kicked off, but they were reasonably like a top 5 team. They get into Overwatch League, it's not the same. Playing every week, you're playing 40 matches a season, right? Like, you have to regularly like update your strategy, and like the process of preparing for an event is very different, right? To preparing for a specific opponent that you know of, that you probably know the maps of, that you know the heroes of, the meta, everything, and then go into that each week, right? With a scrim environment and whatnot, right? We have large-scale fundamental changes to how this scene changes. Now, I will say the weekly play, based on the calendar that we have for the schedule, it's not that different, right?
Yeah.
What is fundamentally different is people are scrimming, like showing their scrims publicly now. So the information is much more readily available, even though we did find out people shared a lot of VODs in the Overwatch League. So, but the effect has to be bigger than that before, right? People will have maybe second jobs or whatever, so they cannot dedicate 100% of their time. They do not live together, right? They, the types of competition and the types of stakes, right, are very, very different in how you have to market yourself. Suddenly, it's much more important to have a brand in order to be signed. So all of these large cluster changes will absolutely change the way we filter out players at the gates in order to get into these signed up pro teams, right?
Yeah.
So I argue that this effect has not even come into full force yet, because we haven't had really this selection process, especially in North America and Europe, because we haven't had the qualification. But even as we get into the groups, into the Swiss stage groups, I think a lot of folks will find out that the competition is now played very differently, and that some of them that succeeded before in the old format, in the structure, in the head coach, in the cushy team manager, into someone orders the food for me, into someone makes my room for me type of stuff, into a wildly different environment that they do not shine in to that same degree, right?
No.
So as that's a delayed effect as the competition goes, as that impact can be felt and those people get drained and they figure out it's actually not, the juice is not worth the squeeze. I'm actually out. And maybe I'm not performing to the same level anymore anyway, and nobody wants me, right?
Yeah.
So I predict that probably already in the mid-season break, we will see a considerable shuffle, mostly brought about by underperformances and really like people burning out on that experience. But especially like in the off season after the stage 4, stage 5, and then the grand finals in Stockholm, I think there will be a landslide of changes coming our way. Also in retirement.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if the retirement front, because a lot of folks just silently retire. They feel like they don't have to
Announce it.
Announce it. They just walk into the night.
Yeah.
They're fine with that, right? And that has been already a case in the Overwatch League and whatnot. But some folks just disappear and you never hear of them again, and that's perfectly respectable as a way to treat this. But I think we will see more of this over this year, and it will also give an opportunity to folks that thrive more in this environment. And hopefully, as we filter for this new process, we now find players that can both be good, especially. Okay, here's my ratio where I usually refer to. If you're one of the top 10% of Overwatch pro players, it's fine to be a cardboard personality. Nobody gives it, like nobody cares whatsoever how Faker is, right?
Sure.
Like the guy is, if anything, like he found his spiritual bag to go in, and he's now not even like really going after wins anymore. Just this constant improvement. He's like in his Daigo stage of his professional career. But I think it will necessarily facilitate folks that like this type of environment, and also probably like the streaming grind and like to develop a personality or have one and like to be invited based on that, right? And like to entertain on that front, right? Maybe we'll see more weird strategies come out of that, right? And it's hard to foresee at this point, but mark my words, I think this will fundamentally change the way Overwatch esports will be perceived. What kind of people will be able to keep up with it and really feel like their time is being respected here?
Yeah. Well, whether that'll be a good thing or a bad thing, or if it indeed does come to pass at all, we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, so that's Yiska on all the retirements that we've been seeing across Overwatch esports over the last few weeks and months. Let us know down in the comments what you reckon. If you disagree with anything Yiska's said or wholeheartedly agree with it, he always likes a good ego stroke. So let us know down in the comments. But yeah, thanks as always, Yiska. And yeah, let us know down in the comments as well what else you want us to discuss as Overwatch esports hopefully starts to come back into its own as this year gets underway proper. But yeah, thanks as always, Yiska. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.